Welcome to Living with Purpose. Today I have Rachel Hutchisson as my guest. Rachel is the CEO of Common Impact, which is an exciting nonprofit organization. But she spent over 30 years in the corporate world where she has been the head of Blackboard's corporate philanthropy and the social impact work that she's done. She's, for those in the nonprofit sector, Blackboard has been just a terrific partner for the nonprofit sector with their technology and support. So please join me in welcoming Rachel. Rachel, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me today.
So Rachel, start off by talking about your growing up, the environment in which you grew up, and how that has got you to where you are today.
So this is a perfect question for me because I just returned from central Pennsylvania where I was visiting my dad, who was about to turn 90. And he was born and raised in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Didn't think he was going to go to college, but ended up very nearby at Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, because his great aunt made that financially possible for him. And she had graduated from the college in 1924. So the first thing you'll see there is I come from this family that didn't have a lot of financial means, but had a real deep connection to education and education for women and helping other people get access to education. So when I was with my dad, he actually told me that my great aunt had a cousin who graduated in her class and that another relative on the other branch of that part of the family went to college in the late 1800s. So I said, Daddy, that's like inherited wealth of women in education. So my dad goes to college and actually reluctantly goes to college. Says he manages to graduate from college. I think he had a lot of fun. And he became a college professor. So I grew up in a small Pennsylvania town in the western part of the state that was the home to a small liberal arts college called Washington and Jefferson. And it was a pretty bad economic time. I was the youngest of three. I am the youngest of three. And I grew up as what we would call a faculty brat. So I ran around with all the other kids of the fellow professors, thinking that professors were a normal thing and debates at dinner tables were normal, and hearing a lot of spoken word, knowing a lot about words and language and storytelling and hearing people doing readings. And so it was a very lively, I was born in the late 1960s, so, 1970s period. And we were very engaged in the community without me knowing that that's what that was. It was just life. We were together doing things together with other people. So I grew up on a college campus, essentially. And when I was 5, my dad had a sabbatical and took our family to England for a year. I lived in Cambridge for a year. And again, didn't have a lot of money, but we had a lot of curiosity. And my parents took my sisters and me, and we drove around Europe. I don't know, I think I saw something like 12 countries when I was very little, sleeping in the car. And we just experienced life at a time when the countries in Europe were way more distinct than they are today. So borders, the money being different, the languages being distinctly different, seeing communist borders, just seeing that there was this world out there. So I came back to school and went into, first grade, having had this experience. And that fundamentally changed my life forever. I mean, that's one of the biggest gifts that my parents ever gave me, was not just the love of travel, but just being in difference and having difference be normal. And Western Pennsylvania was a very diverse place to grow up, economically, racially, socially, et cetera. And I saw a lot of things. I saw a lot of hardship. But education was always that track that was going to get you somewhere positive. So my parents were public servants in a lot of ways. They volunteered all the time. They were on boards. But it wasn't something shiny and official. It was just something that they did. Like, they believed in the public library, so they worked with the public library. They believed in the senior citizen center. My mother tutored people. Like, they were just really engaged. So I learned service from them, but didn't realize until I landed many years later after getting a BA in English and going to grad school for journalism and actually meeting the founder of Blackboard, because I played soccer and he sponsored my team, who's English, sponsored my soccer team. I didn't realize that nonprofits were this whole world of organizations and that service and giving and things that my parents had always done. They'd always been donors, but they didn't think of themselves as philanthropists. I didn't realize it was a whole universe. And my career started, my actual postgraduate school career became all about that, living in that market, if you will, or world. So that's kind of how I got to corporate life. But, my degrees are very much, English, journalism, writing, voice, storytelling, which has been such a huge part, as you know, from your career. That's a huge part of CSR and philanthropy and impact, telling your story, sharing your story, and engaging other people with your story.
So let me just, you said something that I just want to make sure that our listeners really embrace. Because when we just started off the conversation, even before we started recording, you talked about that you had the benefit of inherited wealth.
Oh, absolutely.
And you framed this inherited wealth as women being educated. And I think this is such a fascinating concept because generally we associate inherited wealth with money, and then we kind of look at it and say, okay, these are, kids with extraordinary wealth, and that they're not going to earn their way through what they need to do. But you really kind of framed education as being inherited wealth and not money. And so talk a little bit about that, because I think that's just such a fascinating concept and how that shaped you.
Yeah, it's funny because those words first came out of my mouth maybe 5 days ago. It was Saturday, and I was driving my dad on Route 11 into the college campus in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. We were talking about my great aunt Marion. My dad and I, my dad started a scholarship in her memory at the college, and my husband and I joined her. And we were talking about, we talk openly about the fact that great aunt Marion being educated and becoming a teacher. She got a master's degree from Drexel after that in the 20s, which just blows my mind. Blows my mind. The college where my dad taught for a long time didn't go pro-ed, I think, until the 1970s. And there's very much a Quaker influence in that part of Pennsylvania. There's very focused on education, and there's a reason for that was happening in that part of the world. But he was talking about all these other women in our family that had been educated on his side of the family. And I actually asked him to write down everybody who'd gone to the college and or where they'd gone. And I said to him, Daddy, that is really a gift, because I've done a lot of racial equity training, and I'm one of those people who thought I knew more than I did when all the things were happening around George Floyd. And I'd been through lots of classes and training, and you go into them thinking, well, I'm really liberal-minded and I figured this thing out. And I didn't grow up with a lot of economic privilege, but I had the deck stacked for me to be successful in life, because I have a long line of professors in my family as well. And grandfather taught at Lehigh, aunts and uncles that taught at various different places. My sister's a professor. So education was almost like the family business, higher education. But then to have it be something that was so driven and valued by women and for women. My great aunt didn't end up in college graduating in 1924 because she just wanted to do that on her own. Think about the circumstances of what her parents believed in. And I believe there's a story about her father believing you should always educate your children, and then someone else, bring someone else along too. So, money is one thing, but I realized in all of that racial equity training that I had, because my family did not have a lot of money when I was growing up. In many ways, we were, I think, probably at the poverty line. But I remember not having a lot of food, but we always had the life of the mind, ideas. We knew the conversations happening in my house. So education, I already knew. It was actually an expectation that I would go and become educated myself beyond high school. And I remember my mother always asking me, Rachel, when are you going to get your PhD? And I finally was like, Mom, I don't want to get a PhD in journalism. I don't need a PhD. But it was there's so many people in our family who have. So I started thinking it's absolutely a form of privilege. And it springboards you to be able to function in a world where the economic benefits then come. And then, to be fair, my parents ended up later in life on, actual inherited wealth, which of course is the more traditional form. But when we were going to college, we were very much in that world of financial aid and loans. And I carried a significant amount of loans from school and grad school. but knowing that you can go to school, you will go to school, you will use that as a part of that you're going to have a life of the mind. So that was more of how my parents thought it too. It's like, go to college and major in something and grow up in college, and then go to grad school if you figure out that you want to focus on something. And I know the world has shifted a lot, but I did that. Got to be in English, did a lot of art, architecture, viewing architecture, not doing architecture, travel, study overseas, grow up, learn, just take in the world to have the foundation for whatever life then brings. And I'm privileged that I could do that financially, even with loans.
This is, thank you very much for kind of going deep into this, because I think getting our listeners to kind of understand this notion of your mind being the most important thing that you have, and how purpose and how you show up and education actually leads you to your mind becoming effective. And that then opens up doors all over the place. So let's go back now to, so you joined Blackboard and you became this incredible leader for the nonprofit community. So talk a little bit about that journey and some of the accomplishments you were able to bring. And, this was early. Technology was coming in. Nonprofit organizations were really not using technology. And here you were, and, I with Microsoft and some of our other colleagues were all kind of in that space, trying to kind of look at the effectiveness of the sector and technology playing a role in it.
Absolutely. And I have to say, I love what you said about the mind. And I would say that I now look at it and I think that it's an intersection of the mind and the heart. Like, that's what social impact work is.
Yeah.
And because you can have the mind, but if you don't have the engagement, the heart, the human, the interaction piece, those two things together are very powerful. So as I noted, I came to Charleston, South Carolina. I was dating someone who's a college professor. You know how they go where the jobs are. He was here. We were seeing if we've now been married for more than 30 years, but I was seeing, can I get a job here in Charleston? And I was also looking in other places. And I met Tony Bacher, the founder of Blackboard. He's a Britishman, naturalized American citizen now. And he had created Blackboard answering a classified ad in the New York Times. The Nightingale Bamford School in New York had this North Star computer, and they wanted someone to come in and actually write a program on it. And he did. And that was the beginning of other technology programs for independent schools, one of which was a development office. It was the offices, like the business office, the registrar's office, the soup office, the development office. The naming was really incredibly creative. And the development office product, which became the Razor's Edge, which is the product that the company is most well known for, people started, fundraising was evolving. This is the early 1980s. And so the field of fundraising was really starting it existed, but it wasn't as well known. And so people were moving to different types of nonprofits and saying, I could use this over here at a hospital, or I could use this at a museum. And so the technology itself was growing in use. There weren't as many products then. PCs were making technology more products were being written for them. More people could buy PCs, more organizations could buy them. So I kind of grew up in business. I call myself a student of organizational change. While all these things were happening, the fundraising profession was evolving. Many people learned how to raise money by learning how to use the technology to raise for fundraising. And then the technology would get better because the users were feeding it to it. I know you saw that in their career. But when I started, the products were all in DOS, and we actually had sold IBM hardware with it because many organizations didn't have either.
Yeah.
And shortly thereafter, in the early 90s, selling the hardware and focused on the software. And it went from DOS to Windows, many different versions of Windows. You'll remember the Microsoft Jet Engine, which everyone thought was going to be amazing and then didn't have a lot of capacity when you put too many records in it. Learned that on the fly. And then Windows to the cloud. And so technology was changing. And as technology changes, how you operate inside a technology business changes because software is a subscription. So that changes everything. And then the ownership of the company changed from privately run. I've worked for all of the 4 CEOs who have been at Blackboard so far, to outside investment, to a leader who came from private equity, to a leader who came to us from Microsoft, Mark Chardon, and really brought in what I used to call him the boomer philanthropist. Like, he really understands social venture partners and different thinking around philanthropy. And now Mike Giannoni. So I've lived through all of those and experienced a lot of change, which I found very exciting. And Tony, the founder, was very philanthropic, just was always doing things because he felt he should. And when he left, we'd done a lot of acquisitions, consolidation in the DOS days, and the company continued to do acquisitions. And you had to kind of rationalize cultures, bring them together into one culture. And philanthropy was a great way to do that. Plus, you needed to take traditions and practices and make them into what the company's practices would be in the future. So I eventually stuck out my hand after I did a lot of work in different market research. I was like a journalist for the company. Project management, marketing functions. And I finally was like, I'm not actually technically a marketer. What's next? So I did corporate relations, media, outreach, the outside world, and then added philanthropy. And then I remember sitting with Mark Chardon and saying, philanthropy is not enough. We need to scale this to CSR, and figuring out how to do that for a company that was actually still much smaller than the big guys. I'd go to conferences and I'd see Toyota, Microsoft, and UPS, and all these big companies on the stage. And I'd be like, how do I right size that for us? Because good should be for everyone.
Correct.
So that was my career. And I'm very proud I got to do a lot of wonderful things with affinity groups, leading a women's community. But I was always a part of a very small function that was working to be very impactful. As the company realized, first we just thought we had products, and then we realized, oh, wow, we have a brand that has to do with giving and philanthropy. And isn't that powerful? It's funny how you help because your head's down just doing the work. So I became a CSR person. And you know this, it's about the brand and it's about the people. So it was about employee engagement and it was about brand. And that really does send me very logically to where I am now at Common Impact. And we work with companies to engage their employees in really meaningful skills-based volunteerism projects that benefit nonprofits. I wanted to get back closer to impact. And one of the best things I get to do is to work with the people on the team and help them grow into agents of good for whatever they're going to do for the rest of their careers.
Give me one memory of yours from Blackboard and how nonprofit organizations were able to become impactful because of the technology support that they got from Blackboard.
Probably one of the biggest, there are so many examples of that.
Of course.
But one of the most interesting moments in evolution when I look back at the technology was organizations. Well, there are two. One is organizations going from the back office to the front office, from looking at technology as something that you used behind a closed door to keep records versus something that you use to actually engage your people. And that came because of the web. When I started at Blackboard, we didn't have a website. We had dial-up email. Like, people weren't even using, everything was mail or phone calls. So the beginning of people using websites and the technology connecting them, both first just through basic like online giving, but then the incredible kind of technology plumbing that opened up the ability for the donor, the member, the volunteer to actively engage with a nonprofit brand and for a nonprofit to tell its story. Now, like, you think, well, that's just logical, but it wasn't logical. That, and then when you look at the explosion of the ability to meet people where they are, their phones, all of that takes a lot of technology superpower. Now, you can do on your phone what you couldn't even do in the 1980s.
Yeah. So, just to kind of refresh, for those of you who now go onto the web, onto Facebook, or to go onto any application and immediately connect with people and raise money or donate, just think of all of the technology that has gone into that space. And Blackboard and Rachel were all at the forefront of first just changing mindsets to even get into the use of technology. It's this moving from the back end where it sits in a closet to actually where it comes into the CEO office to be able to effectively become part of the front-facing work you do was just a massive journey. Rachel, to close out, talk a little bit about how purpose has been a driver for you and the importance of purpose and how you've used purpose to show up in whatever you do.
I didn't realize that that's what my parents were modeling. They lived lives of purpose because they valued certain things that led them into certain professions, but also the way they lived their lives. They were making decisions about things. So they definitely modeled what we would now call a purpose-driven life. And then, I've learned so much from working alongside nonprofits. Although I was in the corporate world for 31 years, I always had this foot in the nonprofit world. In some ways, I felt like I was more like the fundraisers and foundation leaders and people I was working with. And there is something really incredibly fulfilling to listen to that part of your heart and your mind that kind of get lit up by mission causes and having meaning. So to me, it's about having meaning in life. What I often say, good is for everyone. And you can walk into a business role and do something that's very purpose-driven and very meaningful. And it's not bad that you are making money. It's not the greed is good, Gordon Gekko days anymore. But I've also loved to see that explosion of purpose-driven, mission-driven roles where you also can make a living and do something really mindful. Many, many years ago, when I was thinking about whether I wanted to drive toward the next job in marketing, and the answer ended up being no, I asked myself, what matters to me? Because you can get really caught up in promotion, promotability, money, success, fame, etc. And I decided, this is corny, but I decided that when I died, I wanted a lot of people to come to my funeral. And I wanted them to say two things: that I was a good person and that I was a good mother. And I started using that frame for everything. I could boil it down. To me, that's kind of what purpose was. If I were going to make a decision at my job, would a good person make this decision? Would a good mother make this decision? And it made things really clear for me. I think that's the wisdom of age. But, now I've got two kids who are in their 20s and they're both working for nonprofits. They're both fundraisers, and I'm so proud of them.
Yeah.
They're choosing to follow their own purpose-driven lives in a world that's more open to that than it was.
Yeah, this is, again, purpose is the ability to actually help us make decisions and prioritize things. And that to me is such an important way of kind of thinking about how purpose allows you to show up, and just being a good person with your authenticity is the major battle that all of us have in making choices. So, Rachel, this has been great. So let's end with your giving us your one golden nugget, a piece of wisdom that you want to share with our listeners.
Well, I love what you just said, because purpose, I focus a lot on operationalizing around creating impact. You can't just believe in something that's mission-driven or purpose-driven to have it happen. You have to kind of operationalize around it. That's where all that business experience comes in. My one golden nugget, something that I really believe, is that relationships are everything. And I say that so much because it's kind of like I think about being 5 years old and, standing on a glacier in Switzerland, being little, and being in Germany and experiencing this food that I'd never had before. And relationships are like that. You need to go into, I think when you put yourself in connection with other people, even if you've just met them, you're going to learn something.
Yeah.
You go into that interaction, whether it's online or in person, with a sense of curiosity, not expectation, and an openness that you don't know what you're going to learn, but you're going to learn something, and it's going to be interesting and fulfilling. And maybe something will come of it. And actually, often something comes of it, but it's something that you don't expect. So investing in relationships, and I particularly tell people who are young, who are focusing really, they're working remotely, they're not with other people. Like, think about how you can put yourself out into the world, because it's in those intersections, whether it's in the elevator with someone at work, or standing in line at the store, or at a conference, or whatever it is. Put down your phone and actually talk to someone, and things will happen. Things will occur to you. You know, the conversation I had with my dad in the car about comparative wealth, and we're just driving down Route 11 in central Pennsylvania and talking to each other. And that is the tradition that I came from, that you talk, you tell stories, you share, and then something comes of it because it gets put into that mind and it just sits there and culminates into something else over time.
Yep. Well, Rachel, thank you very much again to our listeners. Purpose is that renewable source of energy that continues to drive humanity forward. Relationships, education as inherited wealth, and purpose, which is really igniting your memory and allows you to make choices so that you show up as a good person, is really the key insights from this conversation. Rachel, thank you so very much for being part of our podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation.